This story has been recorded at an Addictive Eaters Anonymous meeting in the United States. You can email us at contact@aeainfo.org.
Hi, my name's Katie and I'm an addictive eater. When I was a child, I really loved food. In fact, I think one of my earliest memories is of food. My grandfather giving me a bag of chips and chewing gum, and I got really excited. I remember holidays and Christmas and things being all about the food. I remember going to my nana's house and being really excited about the baking in her tins. And my grandmother, even though she wasn't really that much of a cook, I loved the stew that she used to make, a special stew. I have so many memories of food. I don't have a very good memory in other ways, but what I do remember is of food. But then when I turned 12, I went from being, a semi-normal kid to being very different with my thinking about food. There was a new boy at the school where I went, and I became, obsessed with him, I guess. And so I went on my first diet, and I don't know how I acquired it, but I got a calorie counting book and very, very quickly memorized all the different foods and how many calories they had. And I started trying to eat less calories. I had a little notebook of my goal weight. I hadn't even started my period. I was probably quite small. And yet, I just wanted to lose a little bit. I had a squishy tummy and wobbly thighs, in my opinion. So I just wanted to just firm up, and people around me started to worry about my weight. My parents were concerned, but I didn't know what their concern was. I really liked how the bones stuck out on my shoulder blades, and it's like I was getting attention from this boy, and I really, really liked it. It was kind of thrilling to not eat as much and control my eating. But then, I guess my parents got more concerned as time went on, and so I went to a clinic. There was a facility for people with eating disorders, a hospital facility, and I remember going there. I'm not sure if my parents got a referral from our GP, but I went to this clinic, and there was quite a well-known psychiatrist who dealt with children who had eating disorders, apparently. And I remember having a resentment against him, like feeling this rage within me, because he smoked a pipe and he rocked on his chair, and I thought, he doesn't understand me. He doesn't know how to help me. He doesn't understand. So I remember feeling this rage, and we had family meetings or family discussions, and I felt that same rage, like they don't understand me. I'm not starving myself. I'm not doing this for attention. I'm not a problem. I just want, just to lose a little bit of weight, and what's the big deal, and why don't you all just leave me alone? So I remember getting these, really upset and yelling during those family meetings. But then at that time, I needed to go to therapy once a week. And so I did that, and that was okay. The therapist was really nice, and I got to paint and do different activities. Apparently, I was told that I was a perfectionist and worried too much. And so if I just stopped trying to be perfect and didn't worry about my sister and some different things, then maybe I would eat more or something. I don't know. I guess that was the idea, something along those lines. So I remember my final therapy session after going once a week for a year, and I'd made messy paintings. So my sister and my mother came in, and I remember their the look on their faces, like, oh, this is great, you made a mess. And I was supposedly proud of myself because that meant I wasn't trying to be as perfect. I'm not quite sure. I do remember learning about anorexia at that time and being a little bit scared about what I learned. I knew of Karen Carpenter's story, and I became really fascinated by her, and I would look at music videos of her and think, she was really beautiful, and it was so sad that she died of this disease where she starved herself to death. I didn't think that I would ever do that. I didn't want to be thin like that because I thought that was actually really ugly when people got very, very, very thin. I just thought that I was, too chubby and just needed to lose a little bit of weight. I just wanted to be thin. I didn't want to be skeletal thin, just nicely thin. But I am grateful that I learned about her, because I guess there was something in me that, was a little frightened of, I don't want to cross a line or go down a slippery slope where I can't come back from. So maybe that helped me, I'm not sure, but I do know that I stopped starving as much. My family wasn't quite as worried because I wasn't as underweight. I mean, I still didn't get my periods, or I still didn't like how I looked and was very obsessed about my weight. But I went off to high school and I just did other things to try and control my eating. And, it was always a secret. It was always there in my mind. I would wake up and I would always be thinking about, well, how many calories am I going to eat today? And I tried to be good. Being good was eating less than 800 calories, and being bad was eating more than that. And I often felt bad because I often failed. I started running at lunchtime, and the PE teacher noticed me actually, and she said, oh, you're quite small, you might be good on the cross-country team. So I started running cross-country, and I played soccer, and I got a membership to a gym and started doing aerobics classes and things, and I loved that. So all the time there was this obsession to try and control my eating. I was constantly trying to control it. It was a battle for me. I felt like food was the enemy, and I hated the food in some ways. It was this weird pull within me. I hated it, but then I wanted it. I would do things like not eat anything during the day, or eat as little as possible during the day, and then reward myself at night. After school I would buy things from the dairy, like a can of Diet Coke and a muesli bar. And the muesli bar, I was obsessed about it and would think about it all day long, this can of Coke and this muesli bar. I remember years later a friend saying to me, gosh, you really loved those muesli bars, didn't you? Because of course it was strange what I did with food, but I didn't know it was strange at the time, how much I obsessed about what I was eating and what I looked like, and I often felt like a fat pig. And it's kind of strange to me now that I look back, because I didn't worry about things like my clothes or hair or makeup. I just thought if I could be thin, then everything would be all right. If I could just lose a little bit more or not eat so much, then I would be better. I would be better at school, and boys would like me more, and I would be socially more smooth. I just thought thinness, or just losing a little bit more weight, or controlling the food would just solve all my problems. So that's what I was preoccupied with for much of my thinking, for much of my days. I also was obsessed with boyfriends and boys, and I was pretty unhealthy in that way, because all I was thinking about when I was at school, it seems, was boys and food. And it seems a waste of my time and learning. Now that I look back, I kind of regret that. I was a pretty troubled teenager, and I started drinking alcohol at that time. Friends would go out to parties, and actually the first time I drank alcohol was at my house. My sister and I stole some alcohol from my parents' liquor cabinet, and I got really drunk, my sister, and I loved that feeling, that energetic, buzzed feeling. My sister was talking to her friend on the phone, and I was trying to get her attention and being silly and laughing. I just love that feeling. But then I had drunk so much that I started vomiting and passing out. I passed out. My sister had to put me to bed. I'm not actually sure if my parents found out. But then parties were kind of like that as well. I drank so much that I would black out and throw up, and end up doing things that I regretted. I see that now as that binge drinking was just all part of my addiction and my eating, because I felt alcohol helped me try and control what I was eating. If I didn't eat much during the day and then went out to a party and drank alcohol and then threw up all the food, then that was good, because then I had no food in my system. And the alcohol gave me energy, so I would, walk a lot. My friend and I used to walk all over town to go to different parties. So that was part of the kind of the craziness for me. And, I was pretty troubled soul. I hated myself. I had a lot of self-loathing, and I thought that I was fat and ugly, and it was a pretty dark time. I know my parents found out that I was vomiting. Once I discovered that I could make myself sick after drinking, then I went on to do that, and after eating, I would make myself sick. And so my parents found out, and I went back to therapy for another year. And that was, even worse than the first time, actually, because I was pretty disillusioned with it. I wasn't really able to be honest, and talking about myself for an hour just made me feel worse, and it was so confusing why I was doing what I was doing, and I didn't want to be doing it, but I kept doing it, and I couldn't stop. I thought maybe if I could just get away from my life. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they call it doing a geographical. If I could just get away and start fresh, maybe that would help me. So I went on a high school exchange, and I was pretty upset with the organisation at one point, because they said I couldn't go to a foreign speaking country because exchange students were at high risk of having an eating disorder. And because I had a history of having an eating disorder, then they didn't think that I could go to a foreign speaking country. So I went to the United States. I went to California. And it actually turned out to be a really great experience for me. My eating, my disease kind of slowed down. I was trying to be on my best behaviour living with another family, so my eating wasn't as bad as what it had been. And I went from a cool climate to a warm climate, and that was good for me. So I actually didn't vomit as much during that year, and I had a good year. It says in the big book, when we have a reprieve in our eating, it can be followed by a still worse relapse. So that was what happened for me. I had a reprieve, but then when I went back home, I started working in a cafe, and I had access to more food than I'd ever had before. So I started having massive binges, and I moved out of home and could do things like eat at 24-hour fast food places, and my friends were at university and going to parties, so I started drinking alcohol again. So I went from things being okay, me being in control of my eating, what I felt like I was being good for that year while I was an exchange student, and then I came back and it all got really bad really quickly. So that's when I went to my first 12-step program for a food fellowship, and I'm really grateful now that I found recovery from a young age. I was 19 and my eating had been, really bad. The disease had progressed within me rapidly. So it meant that, by the time I was 19, I really was sick and tired of the food. Food was my enemy and food had beaten me. I tried so hard to be thin and to control it, and it seemed like I just couldn't. Food had more power over me than I wanted it to have. So I came to meetings and I appreciated people's honesty, and I could identify with the struggle, I could identify with the pain and the shame, and I could identify with the obsession in my mind, waking up in the morning thinking about, how can I be good today? How can I control it today? How can I stay out of the food today? So many things in my life were about trying to avoid food. Like if I was running around doing activities, then I was less likely to be in the food, or if I was around other people, then I was less likely to be eating. So all the time I was very scattered, running from one thing to the next, running away from food. So when I went to a meeting and heard people be honest, it allowed me to just relax and to relate, which was comforting. But I didn't know what I needed to do to get well. And after going to meetings for about 6 months, I visited another city. I went to see my friend and I went to a meeting there, and there were people in the room who had very strong recovery and had gotten well. They were no longer eating, and they were very clear about, in order to get well, these are the things that I've done. So I went to that meeting and I was kind of starstruck. It felt like it had a big impact on me, this meeting. And a woman from the meeting phoned me, and she shared with me over the phone her experience. And again, she just explained how addiction was a disease. And even though I may have heard that in the meetings before, it really sunk in for the first time, hearing it from her. And she explained how she'd put down the food and how addiction shifts from one substance to another. So for her, getting well meant putting down food, alcohol, and pills. And she was, she was a slim person and she was a well person and she was free. And I was just so attracted to that. I never thought that there was something that could be a way out for me. In the other meetings I'd gone to, people still talked about it being a struggle and things, but here was this woman who was saying her problem had been removed. So I got off the phone from her and I had, a flood of feeling of hope and peace like I'd never experienced before. I shared honestly with my best friend I was staying with at the time about my problems with eating. She suspected that, there were things wrong with me, but she didn't know what. And, she wanted to support me and she was very encouraging, which I really appreciated. So that was the beginning of the journey for me. It was a sudden experience of really wanting to get well, and continuing to phone this woman, asking her to be my sponsor, asking her for help, asking her what I needed to do. And I wish I could say that was the beginning of my sobriety too, but I was young and stupid, and still had denial. And I thought maybe I'm not that bad, maybe I can cut a few corners. Some of the things that were suggested sounded quite extreme to me. This idea of putting recovery first, so not really having a life, but putting recovery ahead of everything. I didn't really like that. I still wanted to be cool and be like my friends and be worldly and do some of the wonderful things that friends at university were doing. I didn't really want to fully give myself to this simple program. So I found from my own experience that when I didn't do everything, then I crashed and picked up the food again. It says in the book that half measures availed us nothing, and my experience was that 95% measures availed me nothing. So even though I really liked going to meetings, and by that time I'd started going to Alcoholics Anonymous as I realized alcohol was part of my addiction. And I love meetings. I really got a lot of help from my sponsor, and that gave me a lot of peace and structure and guidance. That I really appreciated that. But there was still this sneaky part of me that wasn't fully surrendered. I was still obsessed with boyfriends, or I was still sneaky in certain areas, or undisciplined with my food plan, making mistakes and being careless and sloppy, and just wanting to have a life and then have recovery. And I realized that I couldn't do that. If I wasn't sober, then I didn't have a life at all. I didn't have a chance at life at all. So it meant sort of giving up my ideas on running my life, giving up control of my weight. It wasn't actually hard for me giving up the food, because I hated food in the end. But I still wanted to control my weight, so having to surrender that, and giving up exercise. All these things were still hard for me. I still had some resistance, so it just took me more eating, and I came to realize just how powerless I was and how unmanageable my life was. How really I was a crazy person, left to my own devices. So thankfully, there came a point where, in my heart of hearts, I was beaten, and I was really willing to do whatever it took to get well, and do the things that were suggested to me to get well, just doing them with earnestness and sincerity, and just kind of throwing myself into the 12-step program and trying to practice the principles as thoroughly as I could on a daily basis. It is a spiritual program, and I never had a problem with that. I grew up with religion, and I was open to the idea of a higher power. I was just rebellious against religion and God, because God didn't stop me eating, even though I prayed to God hundreds of times to help me be thin and help me control my eating, help me stop me eating. But when I came in and heard God in the rooms, heard a higher power of my own understanding, that was okay for me, because I did feel a higher power just being in a meeting. I did feel peace being sober, and came to believe in my own idea of a higher power. So asking that higher power to help me to not pick up the first one, helping me to get through my day. And then the other big part of recovery was trying to be of service to other people. So trying to carry the message to others who might be struggling, trying to be of service in meetings. So it really did become a way of life for me. It's really good to be sober. I love this way of life. I am so grateful to a sponsor and for members in the fellowship who have given me so much help. I'm really blessed to have this life and to be freed from the obsession and this really deadly disease. So thank you.